This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
Shop now at the Home Depot and get up to 35% off select appliances. Plus, save up to an extra $400 on select appliances like Frigidaire. From the stainless steel French door refrigerator with crisp steel drawers to keep produce fresh longer, to the 5-burner electric range that lets you cook more at once and get meals on the table faster. Right now, get up to 35% off select appliances like Frigidaire. The Home Depot. How doers get more done. Pricing valid January 9th through January 29th. U.S. only. See store online for details and minimum purchase required.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and the 2025 F1 driver market isn't over yet, with Alpine signing Franco Colapinto as its new reserve. So what does that mean for Jack Doohan, and how long might it be before F1's favourite Argentinian is back in racing action? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me for what I'm sure will be the first of many deal-related podcasts of the year is Scott Mitchell-Malm. Well, Scott, back again for one of these driver market-driven unexpected podcasts.
Yeah, when you think you've seen the back of the 2025 F1 driver market, it comes out swinging. It's quite ridiculous, isn't it, for the 9th of January to be, especially when the grid was set as of the 20th of December, and the Alpine situation was settled in the first weekend back after the summer break at the end of August. And yet here we are convening once again. What do you reckon the driver market situation is going to be by the time we hit our live shows? Are we going to be talking about, will a change have already happened by then?
I would not put it past F1 the way the driver market's working. I mean, Red Bull, you never know what's going to happen there. There's always a chance something could change. So, yeah, well, it's the 16th of January and the 17th of January. We've got our London show on the 16th, the Thursday, and our Birmingham show on the Friday, January the 17th. So I'd like to encourage all F1 teams to make sure that they plan any announcements or news breaking around that so it doesn't interrupt us too much. But, well, it already has interrupted us because this news today has interrupted our planning for that event. Yeah,
we've been doing quite a lot. It's going to be quite fun. Chucked out a couple of little promos, haven't we? Over time, sort of like looking ahead to it. It's counting down now, so really hope that people can join us. I think tickets are still available, but you don't want to miss out. So yeah, if you're in or around the London area, or can get to London on the Thursday, the 16th, or likewise Birmingham for those slightly further north of London on the 17th, we will be there. And maybe if you get your tickets, let us know that you've got your tickets and you want to ask us a question really, really early. If it's going to be something like, what the hell's going on at Alpine? Ask me as soon as possible before the live show so that I can get you a good answer in a week's time.
Excellent. Yes, well, it's £25 a ticket. There's still some available. As I say, Thursday, January the 16th in London, Friday, January the 17th in Birmingham. We will see you there, and I certainly hope I'll see you there, Scott, because you are very, very much booked in. But in the meantime, let's talk about Franco Colapinto. So, what are the details of this deal? On what basis has Colapinto joined Alpine, given he was, maybe still is, on a long-term Williams deal?
Yeah, so he's joined on a multi-year deal to be, well, at the moment anyway, test and reserve driver, which is exactly the role I thought he would take when I was thinking about this, because we ran a story about 24 hours or so before it was announced. What I would point out is that the news has been slightly strangely worded. Both teams have said they've entered into an agreement for Alpine to secure the services of Franco Colapinto on a multi-year deal. And I don't know about you, Ed, just before I continue, that feels like a little bit more legalese than one might expect from something as simple as someone signing someone else's reserve driver.
Exactly. Well, we know that when Colapinto got the Williams race drive, he was given a very hefty length of contract to sign to do it. Didn't really have any choice, so had to take it in order to get the race seat. Sensible move from Williams, because you have an asset you can then do something with. So they got this driver they can't use on a long-term deal. And yeah, that entered into an agreement phraseology suggests there is something that still reflects the fact that Williams owns him. Now, doesn't necessarily even mean he's got the underlying contract, but it could be that there's some sponsorship related stuff that means there's payments that are ongoing to Williams or something like that. I don't know the exact thing, but I don't think it's a completely clean break, because they just say Alpine signed it and then Williams will put out things saying, thanks, Franco, you've done a great job. Good luck with your next venture. So there's definitely still something tying them together. It
feels like there's an invisible string, doesn't it, between Colapinto and Williams. So yeah, maybe it's not a clean break, complete break. Maybe Alpine's only got him for got an option on him, or got him full time for a certain number of years. Then he goes back to Williams. Maybe if he gets a race seat, that becomes a much more permanent thing, longer term. Or as you say, Ed, maybe it is financially related. It'll be to do with the terms on that side with sponsorship and, you know, the companies that have come into Formula One because of Colapinto's stint with Williams, and potential deals that Colapinto and Williams could have had even when he was reserve driver, doing some FP1s and what have you. I mean, there's always the chance it's none of that and it is just pointless jargon, but even by F1 standards, I think it's weird. I would say whatever the exact details, and there's no point pretending we know what those details are right now when we don't, Williams will be financially compensated for this in some way at some point. From Alpine's side, the official line is they are adding a good young driver to the pool that they have on their reserve and simulator and test options, who already has some F1 experience and looks like an interesting talent. The reality, I think, is a little bit more, it's not that subtle, is it? But the reality is a little bit more complicated than that. And I think James Vowles actually said what probably everybody was thinking, because in the acknowledgement that Williams has done for this deal, Vowles said, I'm just going to get the exact wording, because obviously their seats are full for the medium term with Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz. So we believe this agreement with Alpine represents Franco's best chance of securing a race seat in 2025 or 2026. But Edd Straw, how can it be for 2025 if he's going to Alpine as reserve driver when Alpine's got Jack Doohan and Pierre Gasly signed up?
Well, it's been known for a while that Jack Doohan is under threat. We'll probably get on to a bit later in the podcast about just how big that threat is, but it's fairly clear that's the kind of thing that's going on. And I think there's little doubt that the financial side is part of it. Not purely financial, because I think F1 teams, if there's one thing they love, it's really quick drivers. And if there's another thing they love, it's drivers with a lot of money. And if you combine the two, that's great. You know, Alpine do want money to come in, but they're not becoming an all-out renter driver or anything. They just see it as a great opportunity. One thing I will say about the potential terms is, one thing I do know for sure is that when there were early talks going on, this is quite some months ago, so kind of November time, maybe last year, maybe even October, one of the possible deals that had been floated was one whereby Colapinto would go to Alpine and there'd be a split of the sponsorship money between Alpine and Williams. So Alpine would effectively pay Williams for his services by giving them a cut of the sponsorship, etc. I'm sure there have been multiple different versions of that. I'm not saying that's what this is, but that tells you a little bit of what it's about. So ultimately, I think it's very positive. It's clearly positive for Franco Colapinto, because he is unquestionably a lot closer to the possibility of a race seat in the Alpine ecosystem than he is at Williams, where he's basically locked out for a few years. Good for Formula One. Argentinian driver, a lot of backing behind him, possibility of the Argentinian Grand Prix, and of course Colapinto deserves it as well because of what he did last year. So purely from a Colapinto perspective and all those factors, it's a good thing, isn't it? Or a deserved thing, perhaps I should say.
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that he's in a position that is probably, well, it is more likely to result in him getting a race seat. Unless something happened to extract Sainz or Albon, which I would imagine would be quite, not impossible, but fairly sizable change of situation, either somewhere else or within Williams for one of those drivers to be let go early. But yeah, the simple fact is Colapinto on the surface right now, in terms of what is officially being said, has swapped a test and reserve driver role for a team that doesn't have a vacancy for a test and reserve driver role for a team that doesn't have a vacancy. He's not doing that because he thinks it'll be more fun to do that dressed up as an Alpine driver than a Williams driver. He's going there because out of hope or expectation, probably not a guarantee, but maybe expectation rather than hope, that will lead to a race seat more likely than by staying at Williams. And we'll get into sort of the sort of Alpine way of thinking more in a moment. But for Colapinto, you can see why he'd view it as an upgrade circumstantially, but also if he does get on the grid sooner rather than later, in terms of car as well, because the way that Alpine improved through last season, it ended the season with a better car than what Williams had. And with the journey that Williams is on, Alpine is in a better place in the short term than Williams. It should achieve more in the short term. Plus, as a young driver who's just had a taste of F1, he's going to be impatient, isn't he? He wants to be on the grid as soon as possible. So you can see why it would appeal. Plus, I can absolutely imagine Flavio Briatore has been saying all the right things, and someone like Colapinto is lapping it up. And I'm not saying that because I think like the kid's egotistical or anything like that. You just know, like the way that he goes about things is so kind of straightforward, and he is a very confident young man. But it's just very straightforward. And I think Briatore in the Alpine release described him as one of the best young talents in motorsport, in all of motorsport, which is high praise. Who knows, it might be slightly over-egged, but it's an Alpine announcement of a new driver, so of course they're going to talk him up. But I can see why Colapinto would like to do it for those reasons. I'm not 100% sure that's the best long-term environment for him, given he's being brought in precisely because of what Alpine's willing to do with one of its young drivers. And I don't think Williams would do that in the same way. Yes, they dropped Logan Sargent mid-season for Colapinto to get that cameo in the second half of the year. But they had also signed Sargent for a second season in Formula One when it was a bit touch and go whether they would. And they gave him every opportunity to prove himself. So I think the evidence would suggest that you're going to get a little bit more time at Williams than you would in this Alpine environment, but maybe it's different because Colapinto's a bit more of he's now a Briatore signing, isn't he? A Briatore Oliver Oaks signing, whereas Doohan's a bit of a kind of inherited protege, isn't he? Because he was already there before Briatore and Oaks arrived.
I think ultimately it's win-win for Colapinto, isn't it? Because he's not lost anything in that if he was at Williams, he'd be a test and reserve driver. He'd be doing TPC running. He'd be doing the driver and loop simulator work. He'd be available to step in if race drivers are unavailable. He's doing all that with Alpine, but he's a significant step closer to the possibility of a race drive. So I think it's pretty clear why he's taken that chance. This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated, almost without knowing it, when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
I use the New York Times Games app every single day.
I love playing Connections.
With Connections, I need to twist my brain to see the different categories.
I think I know this connection. Look, Bath is a city in England, Sandwich is a city in England, Reading is a city in England, and I'm going to guess Derby is a city in England.
I started Wordle 194 days ago, and I haven't missed a day.
The New York Times Games app has all the games right there.
I absolutely love Spelling Bee. I always have to get Genius.
I've seen you yell at it and say that should be a word.
Totally should be a word.
Sudoku is kind of my version of lifting heavy weights at the gym.
At this point, I'm probably more consistent with doing the crossword than brushing my teeth.
When I can finish a hard puzzle without pins, I feel like the smartest person in the world.
When I have to look up a clue to help me, I'm learning something new.
It gives me joy every single day.
Start playing in the New York Times Games app.
You can download it at nytimes.com/gamesapp.
Right, well, Scott, let's get into the mindset of those running Alpine. What exactly do you think they're doing here long term with their driver strategy? Not just Colapinto, because there's been a bit of other news in terms of their driver roster as well.
So you asked me what they're Jack doing?
Exactly, what they're doing. doing.
This doesn't sound like a name now. The Colapinto announcement was preceded by about 7 or 8 hours by the news that Toyota's Ryo Hirakwa was joining Alpine as a test and reserve driver, as well as part of the expansion of the pool. And fans of Toyota or Hirakawa or the idea of him getting into Formula One might be sat there thinking, but Scott and Ed, why aren't you talking about Hirakawa as an option to replace Duan if Colapinto's going there in this role in such an assured state of being a Duan threat? And the obvious answer is they're very different drivers at very different stages of their career, getting very different things out of Formula One. The Hirakawa announcement is officially along the same lines as that Alpine wanted to bolster their driver pool, and he's a more experienced driver, not in Formula One, although he's done some private testing with McLaren, and then he appeared in Abu Dhabi for McLaren and Haas as well. But he's an older driver. He's got a lot of experience in other categories. He's obviously a top driver in sports cars with Toyota as well. And he is someone who Toyota has wanted to be exposed to Formula One a lot more. That's why they got him into the McLaren program last year. He's going to have an FP1 outing with Alpine at Suzuka, just like he did in Abu Dhabi last year. So that is kind of it's not a token role by any means, because he's going to be doing simulator work. He's going to actually drive older Alpines in their testing program, and he's going to be part of a Grand Prix weekend. So it's serious, but the chances of him stepping into an Alpine, even though he's a reserve driver for a race weekend, feels vanishingly slim, because the Colapinto arrival as well goes in alongside Paul Aron, who was signed as an Alpine junior and reserve at the end of last season. Then you also have drivers that were already there as part of the program, like Victor Martin and Gabriele Mini. Mini being very highly rated, and I suspect sort of him versus Aron really to try and establish themselves as the next Alpine cab off the rank, to use your favoured junior driver expression, Ed. There are other drivers within the Alpine junior ecosystem, but those are sort of the top level ones. And it's interesting because they're clearly stockpiling this very top level reserve option, because I think they're going to have, between Colapinto, Hirakawa, Martin and Aron, they're going to have 4 drivers that have F1 experience to some degree, and then Mini's waiting in the wings as well. That's a very healthy position for them to be in. It's just a question of how seriously they take those talents and who gets the next option. But it's a great situation for a team that left itself, and obviously under different management, so vulnerable a few years ago to getting pointlessly usurped by another team for the services of Oscar Piastri, and didn't really have anyone ready. Some people listening to this might remember that Duan actually almost put himself accidentally in the frame for that seat a few years ago, because there was nobody else really ready, and he was a bit of a surprise option. So it's good for Alpine to be in a position where you can basically have multiple drivers there in the mix and basically say, well, whichever of you does the best job, and then you pick the best of the bunch. That's quite healthy. But Colapinto is so clearly at the front of the queue.
It's worth noting with Hirakwa as well that he turns 31 in March. So he's very much not in the young driver mould as the other ones are. So yeah, Colapinto's come in on a trajectory to a possible race drive. I think it's very fair to say. But it is interesting that Alpine are stockpiling so many. I'm sure there's some commercial elements to it as well in terms of what they're doing. I know last year as well they tried to more actively involve their academy drivers in the simulator running, etc., making sure they were getting decent TPC mileage, etc. So it's not come completely out of the blue, but I suspect the stuff they've already been doing plus the regime change at Alpine means that they've slightly changed their mindset.
And the other thing to remember is when you are incorporating your junior drivers into your race weekend support and driving on the simulator back at the factory, you can't do that when they're racing in Formula 2. And Alpine is being so top heavy with that it's great to have your crop of drivers racing in Formula 2, but then that means that they're all unavailable to be working on the simulator. They're busy racing. So they'll have a good mix now where they can have some drivers racing in Formula 2 on a given weekend, and then presumably Colapinto will be there acting as reserve, or maybe they'd pull someone out of F2 that weekend, but I suspect it'll be Colapinto then. And then a mix of whoever's driving the simulator at base, who gets to drive the simulator between race weekends as well, and how much mileage do you actually log on that over the course of the season. So there's a lot of opportunities for them to work closely now, and it does. I don't know how you feel about this, Ed, but it feels to me like there's been a very, very, very strong course correction with the junior program over the last sort of 12 months or so, and I definitely think Briatore and Oaks are keen to kind of continue with that and accelerate that almost, because I'm not to name names, but there have been times where that has been they've had like one or two sort of semi-serious options in it, but then there've also been one or two where you look and just say you're not there on merit. It's a junior program for hire. Do you know what I mean? It's not, the kind of like older world with sort of pre-teams making more money out of being in F1 world of being a reserve driver, where what do you reckon? What was the peak era for that, Ed? Where it was basically spend a load of money to be allowed to call yourself a reserve driver, stand around in team kit, and never get anywhere near driving a relevant F1 car. In my head, ironically, because it's the same team, it's the sort of Carmen Yorda era of reserve driver is what I'm thinking of.
Well, it's quite good in the era kind of 2010 onwards, or even 2009 onwards, because 2009 was when the testing ban came in. So yeah, your job tended to be a little bit more standing around in full kit rather than actually doing much. And I do like the fact Alpine are taking this seriously, because I've always found it strange when teams have been very ad hoc with this, because you never know when you need a reserve driver to compete. And there's a lot of peripheral stuff they do, because they don't just hang around wearing team kits. So I don't have a big problem with what they're doing here. And of course, they've got a good range of drivers now. And remember, Colapinto, one thing he can't do is those FP1 outings. So they automatically need to have another driver who's there and able to do those sorts of things and make a contribution. Right, Scott, let's get on to the more thorny question now, because obviously Jack Doohan won't be surprised by this. He knew Colapinto was on Alpine's radar. He's known that for some months. Do you think he's dead in the water as an F1 driver as a result? Is it inevitable he'll be out after 6 races, as some have suggested?
He shouldn't be, and it shouldn't be, because if you look at it, and this might sound very naive, but if you look at it on the surface, and even if you believe that what I have been told myself and what I now know that others have heard separately, that Doohan's got a 6-race exit clause in his contract, which isn't the chance to jettison, especially a young driver for performance reasons, definitely isn't unheard of in Formula 1. I feel like 6 races would be a particularly aggressive version of it. That means that there's a performance criteria to hit whereby Alpine can drop him, which presumably therefore means there's a performance criteria that Doohan can hit whereby Alpine can't drop him. And if he hits that or exceeds that, then Alpine should have no reason to or mechanism to get rid of him easily. Now, the flip side to that is that, as we often talked about when we were discussing Sergio Perez's Red Bull situation, for example, is that a Formula One contract can also be honoured by simply paying the driver off, paying them what they are owed for the duration of their contract to break it, basically, to stop it there and then. Now, if Alpine's totally wedded to the idea of putting Colapinto in the car, which it could be for reasons of doing underperformance. It could be because they're seeing or supposedly seeing numbers on the simulator or tests in the older machinery, for example, that Colapinto is just stunningly good and clearly a step ahead of Duan. Or commercial benefits of having Colapinto in the car are so great that even though Duan's doing a good job, you just have to get rid of him. Those are kind of the factors at play here. Now, it's obviously possible that one of those that's the risk that Duan faces. That is what will lead Duan to be kicked out early. But right here and now, maybe, as I said, maybe it's naive, but benefit of the doubt, where it is at face value, Duan is theoretically in control of his own destiny. He hasn't been binned off, and he's not, to my knowledge and to anybody I've spoken to's knowledge, been told you've only got the first 5 races of this year because you've used up one of your 6 in Abu Dhabi last year. Is it too naive to say benefit of the doubt there, or do you think he is a dead man walking?
I think as long as you're in the game, then you have got a chance because you've got the car. And the simple fact is, being really brutal, and this is top-level elite sport, and I don't think that the inevitable question marks and speculation caused by Colapinto coming in will necessarily help Duan, because it will be a bit of a distraction, a bit of extra pressure. But the simple fact remains, at this level, if you get in the car and you deliver, then you will be safe. Because even if you say, oh, well, clearly they like the idea of Colapinto and his money, if Duan jumps in the car and he's Michael Schumacher, then he's worth vastly more than Colapinto would be. And I know that's a high bar, but that's the thing in Formula One. The absolute megastars, and there's not that many of them, they're so insistent in their ability and delivery and talent that regardless of the circumstances, they'll make it work, even under pressure, even with that going on. And that's the thing for Duan. He'll say his ambition is to win the World Championship. So he's got to get in that car, do the absolute maximum, and he's done an impressive job in all his previous car testing and simulator work. Good attitude, good mentality. Every step of the way, he said, I am going to prove to them I should be in this car. He will take that attitude and it's going to be down to him. Yeah, it's going to be hard, and I'm not necessarily saying the environment will be perfect for him maximising what he's got, but it is in his power. That's the thing. He's got the steering wheel in his hands. He can deliver and make the most of it and make sure he can't be replaced.
But he has been partly undermined before he's even started.
Yep.
And I think that compromises the environment that he'll work in.
Oh, it makes it harder, but Max Verstappen, you can put pressure on and undermine Max Verstappen, but he's just going to be an absolutely insistent force of nature. That I know that's a hard level to set. But
George Russell would argue if you put that pressure on Max Verstappen, he'd crack. So.
He would. But what I mean is, there's kind of a few megastar drivers, and then there's a group of drivers who are very, very good, whose career does kind of blow with the wind insofar as prevailing circumstances, this kind of thing, can shape whether they have a 1-year F1 career or 6-race F1 career or a 10-year one. So it's down to you to prove you're in that megastar group.
It is.
And you can do that when you've got the car.
It is, and I understand the argument that it's harsh, but I also understand the argument that this is what F1 can be, and every situation is difficult. Where I feel sympathy for Duan is just in the fact that when a driver finds themselves in a you need to prove yourself or you'll lose your seat scenario, that doesn't normally come in the very first races of your career, and it doesn't normally come 2 months before you've even got in the car for pre-season testing. Every single question Duan gets asked now is going to have an undertone of you might lose your drive. Every session that he does is going to be done with the backdrop of you could lose your drive. Every time he makes a mistake in a session or something goes wrong for him, there'll be a TV camera cut to Franco Colapinto standing in the Alpine garage. That is how it's going to be for him now. So I just to say that word again, because sympathy is kind of very rare that we would dish it out in such circumstances. I think the sympathy lies in the fact that I quite like Duan. I like the way he goes about things. He's trying to be as professional as he can. He's very determined. And he's clearly a decent driver. And I say decent in an F1 context. He's obviously very good driver in it, pretty much any other context. Is he a superstar? I don't think so. But I do think he deserves a real chance to show how he can perform in F1. And I am just a little bit worried he won't necessarily get that in these first few races. The counterpoint is if he steps in and does do a really good job, that I think that'll speak volumes for his ability and his capacity to handle pressure, because I can't imagine a worse kind of setup to be making your... The only recent equivalent I can think of really is it kind of felt a little bit like Nick de Vries was on a road to nowhere within the Red Bull organisation after the weird way that he came into Formula One. But even that was such a bonus for him. It almost didn't matter. Whereas for Duan, this is everything. He's worked super hard from this and he's having his legs chopped out from underneath him before he's even started.
Yeah, it's certainly not ideal. I don't think it's a great situation to put him in. And I do think it's worth trying to make sure your drivers are in the best possible environment to thrive. But at the same time, the point I'm sort of making is that, yeah, it's within his power to make sure that the worst doesn't happen to him. And I don't think we should underestimate Jack Doohan. He's a very quick driver. Without that chassis crack problem, it's possible he could have won F2 a couple of years ago. And I think then people would view him a little bit differently. So, yeah, let's see how he gets on, what his chances are. But I must admit, when you take a step back and look at it, what number would you put on it if I was to say, what's your percentage chance that Doohan is still an Alpine race driver at the end of this season? So when we get to Abu Dhabi 2025, will he still be in that seat, or will Colapinto have taken it?
Right now, it doesn't feel any better or worse than 50-50. Partly because there's one seat and two drivers going for it.
Simple maths.
It feels a little bit like simple maths. But I know, like when we did a verdict on the website, and I know a couple of people kind of expressed the view that they only see this ending one way now, and that sooner or later Colapinto will be in that car. Like I said earlier, I'm pretty sure that Colapinto will not just hope, but will expect to be in that car at some point. But it might be for 26. That could be the other outcome here. It could be that Doohan does a good enough job to stay in the car, and Alpine sees no obvious reason to remove him. But between Colapinto's ability, the commercial prospects and whatnot, actually they think maybe a change at the end of year is better. That's not impossible, especially with a rule change coming and then a chance to fully reset for next year with pre-season testing anyway. Maybe get Colapinto doing the mule car work and that kind of thing. So I think 50-50 for a change in season, maybe slightly more likely that Colapinto will come in longer term. Because I just don't think he's doing this move if he doesn't feel like he's got a very good chance of getting a race seat there. What's the point otherwise?
Yeah, I'd be tempted even to go as far as 60-40 in favour of Colapinto being in the seat at some point this year. But the fact is, it's not yet completely decided. And when push comes to shove, you've just got to make sure it's not going to happen to you. And that is an incredibly tough thing to ask. But we have seen cases where drivers in the past have had a slither of an opportunity, a slender opportunity, a compromised opportunity, a difficult one. And the really good ones make it work for them. And in kind of history, it's forgotten that they were in that situation because, it's such and such driver. Of course, that was going to happen. But they've been. If you look at some of the great drivers, Fernando Alonso shouldn't have had a great season with Minardi in 2001, but he did. It was a horrendously unpromising scenario. So you can do it even when it's difficult. I'm not saying that's exactly the same scenario because he had Briatore very much behind him. And we know Briatore has his favourites, etc., etc. But if I was doing, that's what I'd be thinking. I'd be thinking, do you know what? I did the job when I was a reserve. I showed them I should be in that car. Now I'm in the car. I am going to show them it's right I'm in that car and that the other guy, doesn't matter what he's done, doesn't matter what money he's got, needs to stay on the sidelines. That's the mentality of a superstar driver.
Yeah, I hope that Doohan has that and takes that approach and kind of almost takes some comfort and confidence from the fact that, well, it was unlikely I got this seat in the first place, but I got it. And it's just a case of proving more people wrong, basically.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you used the Alonso example, and then obviously afterwards did make the point about like the Briatore involvement there. Briatore does pick his favourites, and I just get the impression that Doohan's not one of them, and that like Colapinto's kind of the flavour of the month for Briatore, despite those crashes, because the way I said earlier, he talks so highly of Colapinto, but I think it was you that sent me the brief appraisal that Briatore did after Abu Dhabi when Alpine clinched P6 in the championship, and he was obviously waxing lyrical about the job that the aerodynamicists had done, that the race team had done, said Pierre Gasly had done an unbelievable job in that Grand Prix, and then he was just like, and Jack did okay. Like, and it wasn't any more than that for his debut in Abu Dhabi, especially in the circumstances, but it was just one of those moments where you're like, you haven't wowed him, because if he'd done something that had wowed him, I think Briatore would have let the world know. But that just felt like a little bit of a, this guy's fine. But Briatore doesn't want fine. Briatore wants money and he wants fast. That's what he wants. And whether Colapinto is all that, I still have my doubts, because as good as those first few races in F1 were, I was a bit worried by not just the crashes, but also just Albon had him more at arm's length in the final races of 2024. So I guess a final point we might want to make, Ed, so I'll flip the script a little bit and ask you the question. Is Colapinto worth doing this to Duan over? Because this doesn't feel like the way you described it, I think, in your pre-Abu Dhabi piece last year when you were looking at the Duan Colapinto situation for the first time, actually, it was when we covered it. You mentioned that Duan's not considered a superstar in the making like a Kimi Antonelli or an Ollie Behrman, but it's Colapinto. And is that not the level of driver that you should abandon your own protege for after just 5 or 6 races, if that happens?
Yeah, well, I think Colapinto, he's shown he's quick, but there's a difference between being a quick, capable Grand Prix driver who could have a long career at this level and being a potential megastar. And the big question I've got is, I think Colapinto's got a great mentality. I like the approach he's got and the making the most of it, the desire to make the most of it every time he gets in the car. But, of course, he was very undercooked when he came, and he hadn't had an extensive testing previous cars program, etc. So it would be nice to see what happens when he has kind of a proper season, if you like, which if he comes in the middle of this year, he won't have. So I don't know exactly where his ceiling is, but I do like his mentality and his mindset, and it could work well. And it could work well for the team in Formula One, getting Argentina interested in Formula One now. Obviously, Argentina economically, it was once an economic superpower, but that was a very, very long time ago. So I think the assumption, just because he's Argentinian, there's going to be endless money being thrown at people forever, is a little bit something to be a bit careful of. But he could come with an Argentinian Grand Prix, interest some companies, good for Formula One. So he ticks a lot of boxes, and I don't think don't think he's a future world champion, but I don't think many are future world champions. But he could have a pretty long and successful Grand Prix career. Well, thanks for your time, Scott. Thanks to everyone for listening. And remember our live shows in London on January the 16th and in Birmingham on January the 17th. The link's in the episode description if you want to buy tickets there. And you can head to podlifeevents.com. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic. Hey, sports podcast fans, did you know Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide? That's right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. That could mean earnings rewards when you buy those last-minute tickets, those overpriced concessions, and that takeout you ate at home after you bailed on meeting your buddies at the bar. Well, wherever you spend game day, remember, it pays to Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
Hey everyone, it's Robert Mays. The NFL playoffs are here, and we've got you covered on the Athletic Football Show. From Wild Card Weekend all the way through Super Bowl 59, my co-host Derek Klassen and I will guide you through every game, matchup, and big-time performance on the way to one team lifting the Lombardi Trophy in New Orleans. Catch the Athletic Football Show wherever you listen to podcasts.